In today's video, there will be no interruptions this time so that I can showcase you guys my fully updated deck profile for Lavien Lord Granfia in the current standard meta of Overdress. What is up, you guys, and welcome back to the Prime Vanguard channel. As you've seen from today's introduction, I'll be showcasing you guys my updated deck profile on Granfia with the introduction of its new support, Darian. It is a promo card introduced for the Stoicheia Nation that uniquely supports Granfia and improves 90% of the deck's problems that it had prior. I actually really do think that this card will change the entire fabric of how the deck will play, as it will become a new stable for Granfia and fixes, again, most of the deck's issues. As you see, there will be some new support cards that were not introduced into the deck profile last time, and you'll get the entire deck profile as well. I am aware that in my previous post for Lavien Lord Granfia, only about 11 minutes of the video went in. I really did try my hardest to fix it, but unfortunately I just could not get the entire video to come through for my iMovie. So this time I'm praying we don't have any issues, because this is a deck that I am really excited to discuss with you guys. And with that being said, we can now move on over to camera 2 to showcase to you guys my new Granfia deck. But before I do that, and I promise this is the last time I interrupt, but before I do that, I do need you guys to hit that subscribe button if you enjoy content such as this. Please make sure to also hit the like button, and let me know what your thoughts on this deck can be in the comments below. I'm curious to hear you guys' thoughts about Granfia post seeing the new support. And also, don't forget to notification bell so you guys are always up to date on my newest videos coming out. With no more interruptions or announcements, we can finally move on over to camera 2 and discuss Granfia and the updates I made to the deck since my last video. To get this deck profile started off with, we have the Granfia Ride line. Now, I still personally believe that the Granfia Ride line is still the most optimal for the deck. It basically gives you free resources to go into your Granfia, which is super important. This deck, again, does not have a lot of card advantage, so being able to get any sort of free benefit that you can is going to be extremely helpful. I think that the only other ride line right now that I would even try with this deck is the Aurora ride line, if I feel as though the extra aggression is needed to make this deck work, or for this deck to have any chance. But the idea of giving up a lot of cards from my hand, going, especially with Granfia, a deck the way it plays like this, absolutely not. The one you get from here is fine. If you really want it early so that you can rush harder on going second, you can swap to the Aurora ride line again, because you can't play this without this. So really there's no switching. I just think that this is super consistent. Alright, you guys, so to get this deck profile started off with, I am playing 3 copies of Lavien Lord Granfia. Now, Lavien Lord Granfia isn't anything without the beautiful Noblesse Rose token to discuss, so let's talk about it. Granfia, taking advantage of the plant tokens and making them plant gauges while having 2 high-powered attacks on top of the support of the new cards, has improved this deck's consistency a lot. Your 4-attack strategy, having 2 of them be super high power while the other rear guards are able to generate you plant tokens, resources, draw, while having power abilities of their own, has made Granfia's offensive game a lot better. Before the introduction of the new support, as well as the promo card that we will talk about later, you didn't have the best success with this. You had to commit a lot of your pieces towards plant token generation, and really relying on persona riding and the 2 attacks you get from this card that are above the magic numbers of overdressed defense units was really the hard part about this deck. But now that we can commit our pieces to power up cards, resource management, and all of them having some sort of effect to gain power later on, or just power on the turn, means that your persona ride turns, on top of the fact that your Noblesse Rose token acquires a huge amount of power with the plant gauges, means that all of your attacks actually matter. This makes the 4th attack that you get from Granfia's ability a lot better, because now all 4 attacks are going to be hitting over a magic threshold prior to your persona ride turns, which is a big deal, especially in Overdress right now, because 4 to 5 attacks are going to become the norm, and a lot of these decks are starting to incorporate abilities that increase shield value. So you really do want to make sure that your Vanguard is able to hit over these magic numbers, and these 2 just do that. Moving on to my next grade 3, I am playing 3 copies of Clapping Dragon. I still personally believe that Clapping Dragon is a solid rearguard support piece. Granfia, although it no longer has the card advantage issue, I think that Clapping Dragon, as a unit that gets power as well as draw and self-replaces, is still pretty solid. Your Noblesse Rose token is automatically in the back row, and before you go into that, if you're going to use this card right away prior to your opponent being grade 3, or if you go second, you're automatically, with the plant token units called out via other effects, Getting the 3 units in the back row is not a hard circumstance for this card. Our Vanguard doesn't cost any counterblast as well, which means that we are allocating our CB to cards that are needed for the deck to improve its consistency, and I really prefer Clapping Dragon as one of them. You can also make this later in the game a target for the effect of your Noblesse Rose token, so that you are hitting for a very high power, as this unit will be 2300 on its own, and if you have Persona Ride benefits in the Noblesse with a 3 minimum, by itself it reaches 48,000. That's a really strong number, especially considering the fact that decks like Chronojet, Ava, Archite, all of those decks have access to cards that gain 5,000 shield or higher, so you really want to make sure that your rear guards are able to hit over the thresholds of the other defensive cards that they can play against. And Clapping Dragon, being a card that gets power, draws itself back, and is a strong aggressive piece in the later game and a resourceful piece in the early game, makes it a solid support for Granfia. For my next grade 3, I am playing 3 copies of Blue Artillery Dragon Inlet Pulse Dragon. This guy needs no introduction. It honestly is the best resource piece of Stoicheia, but I will say that this is actually the most flexible slot of the deck right now. I truly do believe that despite Inlet Pulse Dragon giving us a soul, grade 3 attacker, as well as an extra card draw, I don't personally think that this card is as needed in this particular style of deck with the way that I'm playing it now as it was prior. I actually think that with the way that Granfia is now and the new support, I can allocate my cards and future support to this deck and take this card out. I slowly see this card leaving simply for the fact that other decks are going to become a lot faster and their attack power is going to become a lot higher. Inlet Pulse Dragon, while this is a card that gives me an extra card draw and a soul, that both are no longer a problem because of the new support. That is honestly how insane the new support card will be when I showcase it, because it just fixes most of the problems this deck had. Inlet Pulse Dragon was just another way of fixing Granfia's card advantage issue, but again, because of the new support, this is no longer a problem. And with the future support coming out for Stoicheia, I definitely see this ratio changing. I could see more of other cards in play going into the deck, or I can see a new card coming in taking the spot entirely. While Inlet Pulse Dragon is without a doubt the best resource management Stoicheia piece that we have right now, I will say that in this deck, besides getting the card draw, it really doesn't do anything for us because we have so many other consistency pieces that improve our strategy overall. And for my final grade 3, I am playing 1 copy of Gradius Gradle. Being able to consistently Persona Ride as much as possible is extremely important for Granfia. While power is not the biggest issue of the deck as it used to be, it still is something we don't want to take a chance on. Persona Riding, on top of the fact that we play a card in the deck that does matter on the Persona Ride turn, means that we want to be able to consistently do that as much as possible, and Gradius Gradle essentially makes us play a 4th copy of our Persona Ride target. Going into our grade 2s, one of the staples of Granfia and the MVP of the grade 2 lineup is Ran or Rancherine. Moving on to our first grade 2, we are playing 4 copies of Ran or Rancherine. This card is without a doubt one of the most important cards of the deck, as its relevancy went up a lot when Chronojet started becoming a more mainstream deck. Chronojet and Overdress, it has a big weakness, and that big weakness is the grade 2 game. If you can stall them out in the grade 2 game long enough while generating resources like they can, and just beat them out with, a lot of attacks as well, then you could potentially do very well. Granfia has that going for it because of this card, and other cards in the deck as well. The great thing about Ran or Rancherine is the fact that your plant token generation ability is on place and continuous throughout the entirety of the game. As long as this card is in the front row, you can continuously generate plant tokens onto the board, so that this way you have other attack targets you can call out to swing at your opponent's rear guards and vanguards. It's one of the main reasons why you were able to keep up with Chronojet Dragon in the grade 2 game, and gives you a lot of early game pressure. Even against decks that are not Chronojet like Ava, Archite, and all the other popular decks right now, this card gives you some early game rush, which is where a lot of overdressed decks have big weaknesses. Decks that are slower or need more time to reach their grade 3 so that they can finally pop off and start using their effects are susceptible to this card, because it's just a free 2-card call to give you that extra rush when needed. A continuous unit that generates plant tokens for free is a great piece to have, especially for Granfia, as it's going to always be something that can make our Noblesse Rose token active when on called and you're set up to get the additional plant token for your Vanguard's ability. For my next grade 2, and a tech piece I am still playing, I am still trying out 2 copies of Tideline Dragon. Now, as I've stated with Granfia and my past experience with this deck, power has been an issue that Granfia suffers from. Besides the 2 big attacks that you get from the Noblesse restand, as well as your Vanguard attack with the Noblesse booster, towards the later game, your power columns, or as well as the early game, they're not that high compared to everything else. You have 2 big attacks and then 2 attacks that are really small. And before I would dilute these attacks or diverge these attacks to the rear guard so I can knock out some pieces, and then rely on my 2 big attacks to obviously go for my opponent's Vanguard, because if they didn't have a PG or if they don't have a lot of shield in hand, I'm expecting critical to come save me, but I don't like doing that. Tideline Dragon makes it to where once you hit that Persona by turn and you're in the late game with your Granfia and you're getting the restand, it becomes a lot scarier. Because if you don't want to give the power to the restanding unit, you can also give the power to a booster for Tideline Dragon, give it a 20k column, you can give it to the restanding target to make it even bigger. You make all of your attacks now for the turn that you are on Granfia matter a lot more. And the great thing about this card is the fact that Granfia already pops off in the late game anyway, and the fact that this card does not cost a counterblast, which will matter when I showcase the later cards, means that it is a power-up card that solves the main issue that Granfia has always had, which is that besides the 2 attacks that we have in the later game, our other 2 attacks don't matter. But this card fixes that, because even if we have a bad target to use with Granfia's ability, this card will choose itself and then something else, and then boom, we have a lot better Persona right turn than we would have prior to not having this card. Entering my grade 1s, I am playing 4 copies of the Custodial Dragon, 3 copies of Farming Pumpkin. Without a doubt an automatic staple towards the Granfia playstyle, this is how in the early game when you were at the grade 1 going second or the grade 2, you were able to start setting up those plant tokens and essentially farming the seeds for your victory. This card being an act ability that continuously gives you plant tokens and will generate you more plant tokens later in the game means that as long as it's a staple piece that can stay on board, this is another card that will generate us the plant tokens needed to reach the gauge limit for our Noblesse Rose token. Those 2 plant tokens on top of the fact that Noblesse can count herself means that we automatically have the 3 tokens needed to activate her ability. The great thing about this card is the fact that you can start using it at any period in the game to set up early to get those plant tokens going, or have it in the later game to start setting up later for your Noblesse Rose token. It also doesn't cost a counterblast again, which is important because I now want to dedicate my CB towards my Clapping Dragon and the other cards that I want to play for the deck. For my next grade 1, I am playing 3 copies of Horu Horu Mushroom. The Horu Horu Mushroom is starting to solidify itself as a Stoicheia staple in a lot of other decks. Being able to move yourself into the soul and give you 2 plant tokens for free is honestly insane. You can use this card to essentially give you 2 bodies on the board to start rushing early with, or you can use this card in the later game with your Granfia to give you 2 plant gauges and give power to one of your cards to make it a magic number when you apply the benefit with the Granfia restand, as well as trigger effects. The fact that this card moves itself into the soul is honestly one of the most important aspects of this card, as you've seen with cards like Tideline Dragon, Farming Pumpkin, and our Vanguard itself. They all cost soul, so we're going to need some form of soul generation to go into the deck, and while I am playing Impulse Dragon, this probably will be the most consistent way of doing so, simply for the fact that we get tokens, we get power, and we get soul, and we get to do all of this for free. This is also an early game rush piece that you can call because it is 6k power, so if you see it, you can just throw it down behind a plant token and just start swinging for miniature numbers to get your offense going. And finally, for the most important card of the deck, and the only reason why we are doing this deck profile, is 4 copies of the new support card, Fairy of Candor, Darian. Fairy of Candor Darian is without a doubt one of the best supporting promos for a deck I have seen in a while. This card truly does, in my opinion, raise Granfia up an entire tier. I really do believe this card is that powerful, and now I will explain why. Darian's ability to generate you a plant token in the back row at any period in the game means that this is another card that will help us generate those plant tokens for free so we can start rushing early. Again, this is one of those card pieces that we can just leave in the back row on the board, so when we're playing the grade 2 game with a deck like Chronojet, or if we want to start rushing hard early with our other pieces that can set up plant tokens like our Farming Pumpkin or our Horu Horu Mushroom, this is one of the cards that do that. And the great thing about it is the fact that that first ability is free, which means that you never have to worry about expelling resources in the early game if you want to do an early game rush strategy, so that's a plus right away. The second benefit to this card is the fact that it works great in the late game as well. Granfia has a card advantage issue, but the beauty about this card is that this card automatically fixes that. Being able to give yourself a plant gauge as well as draw you a card and work at all periods of the game, it means that Granfia now has card advantage, better early game rush, as well as a strong supporting unit that costs only 1 CB, which is perfect because Granfia itself does not cost counterblast, hence the reason why we were able to play other cards in the deck that have better effects that take advantage of our CB to utilize throughout the entirety of the game. And the entirety of the game, it does, because this card will always let you draw one card if you're going to the battle phase and you have that Noblesse Rose token. So if our hand is short, or if we have more than one copies of these, we can just draw potentially 2 cards or another card whenever we need that extra card to do so. I think that's actually super important for Granfia, because this is the most consistent way that you always make sure you can draw another card to your hand and keep your hand cycling throughout your deck, so that this way you can, get pieces that you need for the deck, as this deck is very piece reliant on you seeing certain things to make your offense matter, as well as you having some early game rush. And now for my triggers. So this is where things can get a little bit complicated, but I'm playing 7 critical with the 4 Aspiring Maiden Alana, 3 Sylvanhorn Beast Jackal, the 1 copy of the Stoichea Over trigger, 4 copies of Serene Maiden Lena, and then finally 4 copies of Elegy Pixie. As you can see with this trigger lineup, I'm going for the 7 crit, 4 draw, 4 heal route. Everything is at base power except the critical trigger and the draw trigger. The reason why I'm maxing out the draw triggers at 4 with this deck is because Granfia is a deck that, again, is very reliant on seeing its pieces. And the card advantage issue without Darian basically means that you're playing old Granfia. Darian being able to consistently give you that draw, as well as cards like Clapping Dragon that can self-replace themselves, and Inlet Pulse Dragon that help you draw cards, all those cards self-replace. Granfia doesn't have any form of additional plussing outside of Darian, so therefore being able to have other draw triggers in the deck means that we keep our hand at a healthy size so we can defend against our opponent's attacks. Plus the extra shield value is welcomed as well, in my opinion. Ta-da! This is the winning image for Granfia. Now, as I just got done showcasing deck profile, I think it's important that we discuss the winning image of this deck and how we can take advantage of all these cards in the way we needed to. So going into our Granfia, our final winning image looks like this. We have our Granfia on its Persona Ride, active, giving 10k to our front row. We've used our Clapping Dragon to get another 10,000 power to draw into more cards. Our Pumpkin is set up to use its ability to give us more plant gauges, and then our Darian will give us a plant gauge later. Our Tideline Dragon has been activated to give 10k to wherever we want to on board. I honestly think that depending on what you're playing against will dictate if you're going to use Tideline Dragon to power up its booster and itself, or to use Tideline Dragon to power up itself and another card. Now in this case, because my Clapping Dragon is already at such a high number with being at 3,300, so I've used it on my opponent being a grade 3 or greater, depending on what they're playing against, I could potentially just give Tideline 10k here and 10k to the Pumpkin, or again 10k to here and potentially to the rear guard here. There are a lot of routes you can go with this card, and I appreciate its flexibility so much. I also appreciate the fact that because these cards are using Soul to do their operations, we have the Counterblast available for Darian and Clapping Dragon to be active. We'll have the CB to use Darian's effect to get a card draw, so that this way we're adding more cards to our hand before we go into the attack, and then because we're going to get the extra plant gauge, Noblesse Rose token will already have reached its criteria for its ability. Our base power 9 times out of 10 we are attacking with Granfia is always like 5,300 plus. Even before Persona Riding turns, you might take out like that 10,000 power, maybe swing 43 or 4,800, but those are normal powers that I reach in my personal games. On Persona Ride turn, using the effects of all the cards you see here, this is how we go in for our win. Our Clapping Dragon will be swinging for an extremely high magic number. Our Tideline Dragon will be swinging for high magic number. We'll go in with the Vanguard, we'll apply all the effects of the clapping, we'll restand it with the booster, and then swing for an insanely high number that our opponent will have to PG or die against. That is it for today's deck profile, guys. Thank you so much for staying tuned throughout the entirety of this video. Tell me your thoughts on Granfia and the decisions and card choices that I made for the build. I truly do believe that Granfia, while it is not a top tier contender right now with decks such as Chronojet, Youthberg, Ava, Archite, I do believe that it's still a really good casual pick, and I think that with the introduction of the next set, despite Leonore Mask being the highlight of the Dragon Masquerade booster, the generic support that Stoichea has gone within that set, I still think can have some value in Granfia. I don't think it'll be a tier booster, but I do think that with this new support from Darian, the introduction of these new cards, and my sort of mentality on how I approach this deck with the current meta at this moment, I do think that Granfia is still a deck you can snatch a couple of games from against the current meta decks. But I will let you guys take this deck out, try it in real life, and tell me your thoughts down below how you feel about playing this current version of Granfia that I have. With that being said, card fighters, I will see you soon. Peace.